What up, everybody? The Godfather of Harlem is back with season 3. And the last time we saw Bumpy Johnson and company, he had just received a shipment of 3,000 kilos of heroin, the largest heroin shipment of all time. However, before he was able to profit off of the shipment, it was burnt down in the riots of 1964. Soon as he got it, wasn't able to make any money off of it because his whole building was burnt down to the ground with the shipment, all the heroin in there with it. So at this point, he owes a $3 million debt to the Italians because at the end of last season he borrowed $3 million from Gigante to pay back the Masonic group from the Bank of Harlem the money that he owed them. In exchange, he was going to get back to Chin when the re-up came in. So now we got Bumpy to pay back the Italians, and Joe Columbo specifically, who I'll get to later on in this video. We got Bumpy robbing the money truck that's coming in to drop the cash off at the Bank of Harlem. And if you get back to the beginning of this episode, he had previously went to the same Masonic group again who run the Bank of Harlem and asked them for the $3 million loan so he could pay back the Italians, and they declined him. The judge in particular went on to call him a criminal again and insult him, and Bumpy on the way out the door just lets him know that they're all guilty of the same crimes. Moving forward, what happened was Bumpy found out from Congressman Powell about the funds coming in to rebuild Harlem after the riots because they burnt down basically the whole city. And Congressman Powell has Bumpy's wife Mamie in charge of the distribution of funds that are coming in to none other than the Bank of Harlem, the same bank that is ran by that Masonic group that declined Bumpy the loan. And they basically said they were robbed. They didn't tell him anything about them having a whole bunch of cash coming in. So Bumpy gets Nat, Chance, and the crew. They strap up and they rob the truck. They clean it out of millions. So I'm just thinking about, either though they clean the truck out of millions, I'm thinking they probably still didn't get back the amount of money they lost from the heroin being burnt down in the fire, because 3,000 kilos was lost, and if you're talking anywhere between 20 to 30,000 per key, that's 50 to 100 million dollars lost. So I'm sure that they got enough money to pay back Joe Columbo. They possibly even got enough money to re-up again from the French Connection, hopefully. That's a question we'll have to find out moving forward into episode 2, if Bumpy still even has the French Connection, because that was his whole thing, stressing him out. He said that heroin was his opportunity to control these blocks, which he thought he had lost at the time, but robbing that armored truck possibly saved him the French Connection, and he'll still be able to run Harlem and those blocks. However, he possibly created a couple enemies in doing so. First, with his own wife. We see Mamie watching the news, finding out about the bank being robbed, and they're saying that only a few people know about this job, that it was most likely an inside job. So she almost guaranteed knows that Bumpy was behind this. And who else is going to almost guaranteed know that Bumpy was behind this? And that is going to be none other than Congressman Powell. So Mamie, I think we did see her smacking Bumpy or something in the season 3 trailer. I don't know if it was smacking him or if he went to kiss her and she backed up or something like that. I do see there was some kind of indication there would be strife between the two, and this is probably most likely what is going to cause the strife is Bumpy robbing that trunk after they confided in him, giving him that information, and that was a job that she was going to actually be responsible for, so it probably hits her a little personally. However, like I said, Bumpy took the biggest loss out of everybody through the riots. He lost all that shipment. So if you look at the big picture, he had every right to rob that armored truck. Really, if you just look at the whole picture of how things went down. But he most likely created a op with Congressman Powell, who might start going after Bumpy in this season. We've seen him go after the Italians before. We've seen him go after Bumpy before and Mamie get him to back off. Well, if he goes after Bumpy now, he's probably not going to back off. That gets me into Joe Columbo. See, beginning episode, we saw Bumpy go to the Italians talking about the $3 million debt we just addressed, and they tell him that Joe Columbo is taking over as the new boss while Chin is in jail. And he tells Bumpy that the money is now owed to Joe Columbo. And when Bumpy goes to talk to Joe Columbo, who just got done shooting a man in the kneecaps and having him smashed in a car, Bumpy sees the blood still being cleaned up as he goes there to meet up with Joe Columbo. Joe Columbo is insisting on a partnership. He doesn't really too much care about the money, the $3 million. I mean, he obviously does, but Bumpy doesn't want the partnership. Not that he has anything personal against Joe Columbo. It's just get him basically back in bed and partnering up with the Italians again. He just didn't want that kind of partnership because it cost him too much the previous time when he partnered up with Chin. But Joe Columbo wanted that partnership because he wanted control over Harlem. That was what it was all about. Being able to get control and a lock on Harlem through Bumpy, and also get in with his narcotics connection, because that's obviously Joe Columbo's thinking he's going to be able to still keep the French Connect. So possibly with the whole thing that went down here, Bumpy will be able to keep the French Connect, but we will have to see what happens with that moving forward. As far as what we know about Joe Columbo, he is into carjacking. He steals cars and then resells them and resells the parts throughout the world, through different places throughout the world, and was definitely trying to get into the narcotics industry. That's why he was seeking the partnership with Bumpy. Moving on to Stella Gigante, Chin's daughter, who's just snitched on her own father, had the boss Chin locked up at the end of last season. Now Chin is in jail without bond and facing life in prison. And the question regarding Chin is, will he beat his charges? And I believe he is going to somehow beat the charges that he is currently facing, and he will get out of jail. I don't think we've seen the last of Chin Gigante on this show, because the real Chin Gigante, Vincent Gigante, in real life, it took the feds years to take him down. It wasn't until he was an old man when the feds were actually able to take him down in real life. However, concerning this character and a lot of the other mafia figures, their timelines aren't necessarily accurate with this show. Like, the characters are real people, but the timeline of which the interactions going on aren't necessarily accurate with this particular show, the real life characters with this particular show. Joe Bonanno was one who was exiled away around this particular time, though his character did have a more accurate timeline than what Chin Gigante did face. But nonetheless, I do expect Chin to get out of jail. However, his wife Stella's stepmother, Olympia, wants blood. We see her first yelling and saying a bunch of nasty things to Stella in the kitchen, followed by punching her in the face or smacking her in the face. She then goes to meet with the 5 families. The current boss, I don't have his name, but the guy who's basically in charge right now, she meets up with him and they have some kind of history. It's pretty interesting to know what kind of history they had, because she tells him they go back a long way, and she tells him that Chin doesn't even have to know about the hit being put out on Stella. So that's possibly they have a relationship that between the two of them that Chin never even knew about. So this could be something moving forward later at a later time that could play back. But she sets Stella up by saying that her uncle is coming over to pray, but she actually has the hitman coming. But what happens is Stella hears him coming in, and she is actually able to take the hitman down herself and kill him. So what will she do with the body? She has a body in there now she has to do something with. What will she do to Olympia? Will she stay there with that man's gun until Olympia gets home and take her down too? Or will she call the federal agent she been snitching to tell her that somebody came in to kill her and it was set up by her stepmother? Another possibility is she could get Joe Columbo involved, because we see a scene in the trailer, a couple scenes in the trailer. One, I believe she's walking into Joe Columbo's junkyard, and then we have another scene in the trailer. We see Stella going to dinner or to lunch out to eat with Joe Columbo. So she could possibly turn to the man who has taken over for her father for that side of the family, Joe Columbo, to turn to about her mother, and the families putting a hit out on a woman who they definitely are not, a female and a child, who both are no-nos. The guy said the rules of the game, but he didn't follow them because he thought he could get away with it clean. Now he's got trouble on his hands because Stella is still alive, and she knows that her mother went to somebody to put a hit out on her. So that's going to be really interesting. That's the most compelling storyline to me going into the next particular episode, is what she gonna do, what Stella gonna do with the situation she's currently in right now. And getting me into my final topic for this video, and which is Malcolm X. We last seen Omar and the leader of Mosque number 7 going out to take out Malcolm after his radio show, but through Elise, Bumpy gets the drop and goes to save Malcolm instead of saving his dope, and he takes out the guy from Mosque number 7 and leaves Omar running with a bounty out on his head basically. But Omar finds Elise at the diner, and he wants to make peace with Malcolm, who is currently being protected by a small army of Bumpy's men. So when he goes there, they tie him up, they put the guns to his head. Malcolm questions him, but he decides to let him go. He gives mercy to him and decides to let him go. Moving forward with Malcolm, we saw him eating lunch with Elise, and that he plans to start his own mosque with the help of Elise. He needs funding and he needs followers. He could possibly turn to Bumpy for the funding, or Elise could turn to her dad to help possibly as well, because she said she would do whatever it takes to help Malcolm out. But if he does try to establish his own mosque and the word gets back to the nation in Chicago, this will just create even more enemies for Malcolm moving forward. The current timeline we are at is early August of 1964, and the assassination of Malcolm X was February 21st, 1965. So we definitely could see that in this particular season, depending how far it moves forward. Possibly it would be about 6 months away. Possibly at the end of this season, we could see the end of Malcolm X on this show. And there you have it. Godfather of Harlem is back for season 3. Leave your thoughts in the comments.